If you have a family history of witchcraft, please stitch us to tell me your stories because I got an email from a guy named Lazar who told me his grandmother was a witch. And even though she was a good witch and tried to use her gift for good, sometimes bad things still happen. And he told me a few stories about things that happened while he was growing up in her house. So him and his mother always lived with him throughout his childhood because I guess his mother got pregnant young. His dad was never really in the picture and they just generally didn't have a lot of money. And in his household, it wasn't a question of whether or not Celeste had a gift. It was a fact. It was not something that he was ever taught to question. And not until he got older and went into the outside world that he realized a lot of people didn't have this gift. And the town that they lived in was in rural Louisiana. He said nobody in the town really had a lot of money, but Celeste was both well known, respected, and a little bit feared in their town because her magic was rooted in intuition, in rituals, and in things that she had learned that had been passed down from generation to generation. He said in their house, the supernatural and the mundane blurred together like it was nothing. And Celeste often tried to help the local townspeople find lost objects. In one case, she helped locate a child that had gone missing a few hours earlier. She would channel deceased relatives of grieving people. She had a bunch of tools all around the house that he was not allowed to touch. And he said as a kid, he would get upset because he didn't have this gift and he didn't understand why he couldn't play with some of her tools. And she told him that the gift chooses people. It's not something that people can just decide to have, but that with that gift also comes responsibility. But he said he was 7 when he first learned that good intentions can sometimes open bad doors. So this man came to the house and he wanted Celeste to channel his daughter who he had recently lost to a disease. I guess she was a young girl. And for some reason, he said he remembered Celeste did not want to do it. He didn't know why, but normally she was down to help anybody. But that time specifically, she was like, no, no, no. And the guy begged her. So finally, against her better judgment, she agrees. And Lazar said that he was often allowed to watch the rituals. There was nothing bad going on, but for some reason that night his mom told him he had to go to bed. But being like a little 7-year-old, he wanted to see and he was being nosy. So he went to the top of the stairs and he was watching them all sitting around the kitchen table with Celeste's tools all laid out. He said she had dowsing rods, a spirit slate, and then this little crystal pendulum that she always wore around her wrist. But first she tries to contact the daughter with this pendulum, but she's not getting anything. So she decides she's going to go into a trance and she takes her spirit board out. He described it as something like a chalkboard. So she's holding the chalk. She goes into the trance and her hand started writing in these really jerky movements. And she writes, "I'm here," in childlike letters. The man immediately starts sobbing. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I knew she wasn't gone. What is she saying to you?" Celeste doesn't say anything. She's just sitting there with this calm look across her face, still in her trance. And the man is still crying. He's like, "What is she saying?" And as she's not answering him, he's growing more frantic. And he's like, "What is her message for me? Why is she here? What does she want to tell me?" And Celeste, he said her face didn't change, but he noticed that she gripped the table a little bit harder. And the man at this point is yelling at her. He's like, "Tell me what my daughter wants to tell me." And all of a sudden Celeste's eyes pop open from this relaxed state that she had on her face, and her hand jerks across the chalkboard and it writes, "Not her, not her, not her," 3 times in a different font. Celeste slams down the board and she gets up and she yells at the man to leave. There is somewhat of an argument because the man is convinced that it was his daughter and she did want to talk to him, but Celeste is insistent. She kicks him out of the house and he stumbles off into the night. Celeste takes the chalk and the spirit slate and goes off after him, and she doesn't come back until the early hours of the morning. But while she was gone, Lazar was laying in his bed trying to fall asleep when he hears 3 soft knocks coming from the ceiling above his bed. And he said at that point he was used to paranormal activity and hearing bumps and things moving around in the night. And it never really scared him before because of the nature of Celeste's work. He was used to it. But he said that night it did scare him, probably because the state of the man, who was frantic when he left the house. So he goes into his mom's room. He tells her he's hearing a noise coming from the attic. She comes into his room and she basically just tells him, "Don't acknowledge it. Don't invite them. They can't do anything to you if you don't invite them." He said when Celeste returned, she no longer had the chalk or the spirit slate, but then she was sick in bed for 3 weeks and she refused to see anybody. Everybody was really worried about her, but she ended up making a full recovery. Not long after that, another woman comes to the house and she says she needs help finding her late husband's wedding ring. He had gotten sick all of a sudden and passed away, and his wedding ring had gone missing in the days leading up to his passing. The woman was convinced that her husband couldn't rest until his ring was found, so Celeste agrees to help, and she pulls out her scrying mirror, and Lazar is allowed to actually watch this ritual, so he's sitting with them. He describes her scrying mirror as a black mirror, basically. So she's looking into it and she whispers, "Where is the ring?" And he goes, walks behind her, stares over her shoulders because he's looking into the mirror, seeing if he can see anything. And he says, "Nothing appeared." But then she says, "I see it. It's in this table." And she describes the table to the woman, and the woman's like, "I don't know. I have a lot of tables in my house. Can you come over there and maybe you can identify the table?" And Celeste says, "Sure." So she's watching Lazar that day. His mother's out somewhere, I don't know. They go over to the woman's house, and Celeste identifies the table that the ring is in. And the ring is in the drawer. So the woman's all excited. She picks it up, she puts it on her finger, and then she gasps and she drops the ring on the floor. And they're like, "What happened?" And she's like, "It burned me." Celeste grabs a towel and she picks up the ring and she hands the ring in the towel to the woman, and she said, "He didn't want you to find it, you need to bury it." And she instructs the woman to bury the ring beneath a tree in their yard. That night, Lazar heard sobbing coming from the woods behind their house, and he said it lasted until dawn. Lazar was 19 when Celeste finally passed away, but before she did, they were talking and he told her that he had regrets that he didn't inherit her gift. And she basically tells him, "It's not so much as a gift as it is a burden. Every time I help someone, I take part of their pain. And sometimes when you're trying to help people, you invite things into this world that don't belong." Lazar's mother is still alive. He said she has somewhat of a gift, but not to the extent that Celeste had. And she still lives in Celeste's house along with all of Celeste's tools. And his mother has told him that, like, these are yours. You can do whatever you want with them. And he said he doesn't know what to do with them because it feels wrong to give them away, but it also feels wrong to hold on to them when they weren't meant for him. Lazar said I could use his real name, so he'll be in the comments. Let him know if you have any thoughts on what to do with Celeste's tools, and keep sending me your spooky, scary stories. I'll keep adding them to this playlist.